A sermon for the second Sunday of Easter. The story on the road to Emmaus, like the story of the Prodigal Son, is perhaps one of the most loved stories in the Bible. At the level of drama, it has everything: sorrow, suspense, puzzlement, a gradual dawning of light. Then in the second half, unexpected actions, astonishing recognition, a flurry of excitement and activity. A wonderful, unique tale, and at the same time a model for what being a Christian is all about. Often used for meditation, it walks us through the steps we need to take on our journey towards Jesus. But to appreciate the full impact that this meeting and events can have on us and on these two disciples, we have to start from where they are, at the Crucifixion. One of the films that Channel 4 featured over the Easter holidays was The Passion of Christ, described as a profound story of courage and sacrifice, depicting the final 12 hours in the life of Jesus Christ. It's a production that closely meshes in with the four Gospels, yet is based on the visions of an 18th century Roman Catholic Augustinian nun from Germany, Anne Catherine Emmerich. Since her visions of the events are much more detailed and brutal than the Gospels, it doesn't pull any punches as far as the visual effects are concerned. The film shows scenes of Jesus being beaten and whipped relentlessly across the full length of his body. When the Roman guards put a purple robe on him and then push a twisted crown of thorns onto his head, and they beat him around the head all the more. Pilate's original intention was to have Jesus whipped, then let go. But that doesn't work out, and the result is that he becomes the most bloodied and scarred of the three to be crucified. Reflecting the words of Isaiah, his form disfigured, lost all human likeness, his appearance so changed he no longer looked like a man. Yet it was for our afflictions he was bearing, our pain he endured. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The chastisement he bore restored us to health, and by wounds we are healed. If the disciples witnessed all this brutality against him and then saw him die, and yet he did not lift a finger to help himself or cry out against his attackers, we can't begin to imagine how disillusioned and heartbroken they must have felt. Their understanding of what was happening ended like the film At the Crucifixion. But there was more to come, as the two walking and talking together on the road, and the rest of the disciples were soon to discover. There was no point in looking back. 3 crosses etched against the sky, brutal violence, bloody scars in the memory. The two travellers were wrapped within themselves, encircled by pain and despair. So they didn't notice the man waiting at the side. He made them start, appearing as he did from the quickening shadows. "May I journey with you?" he said. They nodded silently, barely glancing at him. He fell in step with them. The conversation was stilted, disjointed, until the bigger of the two stopped, looked at the stranger. "Look, we don't want to talk. We've had it up to here. Leave off, will you?" The stranger nodded, but did not withdraw. He continued to walk with them. The silence became heavy. Then, after a little while, the stranger turned and said, "Why do you grieve so?" The other disciple wanted to talk, and he turned towards him. We watched our friend die. But in the dusk, he saw again the look of the man he loved. His grief caught him. His voice broke. He turned away to smother the pain. "He was more than our friend," said the first disciple. "More than that, bigger, stronger. We had such dreams, such belief that he would change the world." His anger flared up. "But he's dead," he shouted to the stranger. "Do you understand? Dead, cold and empty, just like our hopes and dreams." Do you know what it's like to be like that? To really believe in someone and then he's gone. You think he'll walk back through the door, or hear his voice in the crowd, or that he's just around the corner. And then you remember he's dead, finished. There's nothing left. The big man stopped. He suddenly felt very cold, and his voice went very quiet. And worse, all the anger, all the hate, all the guilt, the pain, because at the heart of it, we loved him oh so very much. He lowered his hands and turned back to the road. You'd never understand. Because the light had dropped and their hearts were not seeking, they did not see the look on the face of the stranger, or they would have recognized someone who had lived through pain at its most searing, through human grief at its deepest. The moment passed, and the stranger fell back into the step with them. And this time they all talked of the past and present, of dying and living, of God and themselves. The journey flew by, and they forgot their weary hearts, and before long Emmaus was in front of them. They hesitated at the crossroads, awkward at parting. The disciples didn't want the conversations to end. "Come home with us," they said. And the one whose sorrow was caught with rage held out his hand. "Please, come home with us." Simple words, simply offered, simply received. And at the house of mourning, the lamps were lit, and the families gathered round the table. The stranger became the guest. He took the bread and blessed it. As he tore it in two, he bowed his head as if he could no longer bear their lack of seeing, and looked up, his eyes shining with the truth, as he offered the broken bread. Jesus. After his death, Jesus would appear alive on 12 separate occasions to at least 550 people. And over those next few weeks, something extraordinary happened to the disciples. They changed from being a group in hiding, frightened of the authorities, to one publicly declaring that Jesus was alive and that they'd seen him. The Bible teaches us that the death of Jesus is his great triumph over Satan, that his death was necessary to win something that could be won in no other way, to win us. And the resurrection completes the picture. Because of the resurrection, we have hope beyond the grave and a way to salvation. As the disciples came to realize, they'd given up so much for him, but he had given up everything for them. Today, Jesus is here to walk with us on our journey of faith, to take us back to the reason for it all, to open our eyes and to set our hearts on fire so we can tell others what we have felt and seen to meet Jesus, who has accomplished his Father's work, to play our part in his mission of forgiveness and love. The two disciples discovered one of the great truths of the gospel, that Jesus doesn't simply fulfill our hopes, but far exceeds them. And that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus for us, like those disciples, a new story begins.